let's jump in then. Matt Holler, president of IFA, thanks so much for coming to Scorpion in Dallas.
How's Great to be here, Jamie.
This is first time in the studio, by the way.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
They can't see like 100 cameras here around the spectrum and a massive audience.
Huge audience. Huge audience. Yeah. Well, we wanted to make room for a studio audience, so we could do the clapping. We're talking about Seinfeld a second ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's back to the 90s here.
Yeah.
Right? Laugh tracks and all.
That's right. That's right. We'll get to live tracks later. We're going to talk about some music. But so you've been in franchising for a long time. What drew you into franchising in IFA?
Yeah, so I've been at IFA 15 years in 4 different roles at the organization. I think like a lot of people, I was drawn to franchising out of, need to do something different.
Yeah.
And a desire to do something different. I was working in the pharmaceutical industry at another trade organization and, frankly, wasn't that energized about some of the work that I was doing there and, started casting about for other opportunities and came upon IFA, had known of IFA, but didn't know a whole lot actually about franchising, but knew about their role in shaping policy and being a voice on small business issues. And there was a new CEO at the organization at the time who was looking to elevate IFA's voice even further and had created a new role, which was a director of communication. So that's how I came to the organization. It was 15 years ago. I've worked in state government relations and federal government relations. And then during COVID, the board asked me if I was interested in taking on this role to lead the organization. And it was a really interesting time and a great challenge. And we were all locked in our homes and, dealing with all sorts of issues coming still in COVID, really, 2021.
Yeah.
But it's been a great run and have a great team and great members and lots of important issues. So
what are the primary things you've tried to tackle since coming into this role from COVID? Because that was the first time you and I interacted.
Yeah.
We were talking, there was a webinar that we had, I think, participated in around PPP loans or something like that. And, but what policy wise, like what are the things you've been trying to drive since you've taken over? Yeah.
On the policy front, I would say making sure that IFA is really representing franchising, not just the interest of franchisors. And, 25 years ago, the IFA board opened up membership and then, board service and ultimately leadership of the organization strategy to franchisees. But I think in the last 5 years, we've really, created some intentionality around being more franchising, not just franchisor oriented.
Yeah.
And COVID was a great, excuse to be able to really deliver for franchisees around PPP and some of the ancillary issues that came up around tax treatment of PPP loans. So that's been a big priority of mine. We've got some recent things that we've done, which we can talk about in terms of investments that the organization has made with multi-unit franchisees. And that's been really something I'm proud of and something that I think we'll see a lot more of as we move forward. Just maybe taking a bit of a step back, though. I mean, you mentioned webinars. So, we did webinars, but we didn't really have infrastructure to do education online, right before COVID.
Yeah.
And, that was something we had to make a lot of investment in infrastructure and building education as a key component of our strategy at a time where you literally couldn't be with people, right? So our business, we're a nonprofit, but we're still a business, right? And today, more than 50% of IFA's revenue comes from various events. And events are really about education and networking. But we had to find a way to deliver that experience virtually and frankly had no infrastructure to do it. So we had to make some serious investments in technology, in people to manifest that into reality. And bringing the franchise community together during COVID and now all of the content and education that we do online through the IFA Learning Academy, through the CFE program, really extending the life of what we do when we're in person at our convention or other events to a 365-day-a-year, engagement, education, convening is a big part of what we do as an organization.
Yeah. I remember, I think one of the key differences since you've taken over in this role has been what you just described. We've worked with IFA for a really long time, but it was like always kind of just in the context of the convention.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want IFA to be a 4-day thing that people think about. We want people to maybe not think about us 365 days a year, but have something for meeting our members where they are, whatever they need at any particular time. And so that has really been a part of our strategy, and then creating convening and community around whether it's marketing or development or technology, individuals with those key roles in the various elements of every franchisor organization, and then supplier partners like Scorpion and others who can provide thought leadership and training and best practices in that space as well.
Yeah. So 2025 has been a great year for franchising. Outlook's really strong for next year. What do you think's driving that momentum?
Yeah, I think people are looking for alternative forms of wealth creation, right? Just today, right, or this week, there's been, so much downsizing in corporate America, right? So that's kind of one vertical that I think is driving, at least leads into franchisors. Now, we have to deal with that at a time where, for a lot of brands, not all, but a lot of brands are seeing consumers pull back, right, in different ways. So I think franchising, it's incredibly resilient, right? People ask me, like, how's franchising doing? It's like, well, there's 300 industries. Yeah. So, at a time where, quick service restaurants may be, down, but, home services could be very up. So I think, it's hard to paint franchising with one, big brush, but I think generally speaking, franchising is an incredibly resilient business model. Those franchisors that have their franchisees' interests, first and foremost, and are, in touch with them and, on the front lines with them, are figuring out ways to take costs, out of the system and figure out how to focus on unit level economics. And that's something that for the strongest brands, we're seeing the performance still. And that's your greatest validator for system growth is existing franchisees that want to buy more, or existing franchisees that are telling new leads, hey, this is a good brand, even in a relatively lumpy economy, that we're growing, and that's a really good thing. Yeah.
Thinking about wealth creation, I think one of the paths in franchising to wealth creation is that multi-unit model. So you mentioned earlier, how you guys have tried to not just support the franchisor at the brand, but how do we support the franchisees, and specifically multi-unit franchisees? Are there specific programs that you're really proud about that you've kind of targeted the multi-unit or the people that want to become multi-unit? Can you talk about some of those things?
Well, it's definitely the one of the biggest trends in franchising is franchisors looking for mumbos or multi-unit owners, right? Multi-unit, multi-brand. So we're not going to be able to necessarily build that audience ourselves, but we've always been a part of the multi-unit franchising conference, which was put on by Franchise Update Media. So we were in a joint venture relationship with Franchise Update Media over the last 3 years. And ultimately that led to IFA acquiring that organization, still operate as a standalone brand. And the Multi-Unit Franchising Conference is really an event built by multi-unit franchisees for multi-unit franchisees. There's a ton of mentorship that goes on at that conference for, somebody that may own, 3 restaurants and wants to, become a 10 or a 20, and maybe diversify their portfolio and learn from some of those, who own hundreds or even thousands of franchises. So IFA's ability to, get in that business more directly with those relationships, it's also who our franchisor members are increasingly looking for.
Sure.
So that's a huge opportunity. On advocacy, it's just, there's scale, right? So these owners have, I think, more time and more resources to invest in, communication with lawmakers and, traveling to do things that matter to support IFA's advocacy agenda. In terms of, programs, it's opening that door for franchisors who want those relationships. So that manifests itself not just, at that conference, but through the website and through storytelling and really getting the message out about, hey, how did I do it? How did I build this brand or this franchise enterprise from, one location to, dozens or hundreds or even thousands.
Yeah.
And, we're a platform. We have a new brand and a new website, franchise.org, where, we want to be the single source of information for anybody looking for information and education about franchising. And so being that storytelling platform for people that have, done it themselves and others who can see themselves in other stories like that is inspirational, but also educational.
Yeah. Speaking of multi-unit and franchisors for that matter, there's been a rush of private equity into the franchise community in the last several years, particularly since COVID. We've seen it, we have a vantage point at Scorpion because we work across franchise, and we also do a lot in home services, residential services. And even in that market on the independents, there's been a ton of private equity investment. So how has that kind of shaping how you, as the president of IFA, like view the franchise community? How's that shaping how you think about policy? How's it shaping how you think about, investing time and getting to know some of these funds? Do you think about those things? Like, how do you approach that situation?
Yeah, it's a huge trend on both the franchisor, franchisee, and even the supplier side. So it's about embracing it and making sure that within private equity, there's a lot of players that, of course, almost legacy, been in franchising for decades, and then there's a lot of new players. And new players don't always understand the importance of the franchisor-franchisee relationship. And I view it as our job to educate them as the trade that represents franchising. Yeah. And so that's an opportunity for us. And we need to be kind of in that audience. And we have, dozens of PE firms and family offices and venture, the whole kind of stack who are involved in the association. We'd certainly welcome more. And building, they want obviously relationships with, founders and those, who are seeking, growth capital or seeking plans for succession planning. That is something that we need to embrace from a content standpoint, but also create forums for networking and education. And some, structured deal making too. Yeah. So it's a big priority of ours. What it does do, which is a challenge, is, franchising is not always owned, in the community, right? When you have outside capital, it's a different business that we're representing. Now it's still, the exception, not the norm, but the trend continues to go in that direction. I think partly that's a function of, the economy, regulations, people that are, Gen Z, that may be less interested in, buying their parents', business and going and doing something different. But people need an exit strategy, and that capital is available, and so it makes it a little different for us to tell the story of franchising as a local business operating in your community. That's still is a lot of the story, but it's not all of the story. Yeah, and just being mindful of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the plus side, just knowing that there's been so much private equity, influx of money into the franchising obviously shows the resilience of the business model, how important these brands are. Otherwise, private equity would figure out other places to deploy that capital. So.
No doubt. I mean, they clearly see it as, a growth strategy in place to put their capital and get a return on the investment. That's still at the end of the day, what that business model is. I just think they need to understand, the relationship aspect that still has to exist between the franchisor and the franchisee. And if it's institutional money that is, without a relationship, right, then it's, that's not, I think, what most people want within the franchisor-franchisee relationship. And some brands, are still pretty allergic to, having outside capital. They want an owner-operator in the community operating, their franchise. And that's, a certain organization's prerogative. And they may change their perspective, over time as, fewer and fewer of those people are available. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, 2025, obviously there's been some consumer pullback in spending. Certain industries are kind of thriving. Certain are maybe seeing a little bit of a downturn or flattening. What specific industries and franchise are you seeing a lot of growth from? And do you think are going to be big growth levers in 2026?
Yeah. Home services is doing very well. Pet care also doing quite well. And restaurants are still performing above the industry average. So, despite some of the consumer pullback, I think what we see is more of a trading down on the consumer side. But timing the market on the consumer, if you're thinking about a franchise investment, is probably not the right way to look at something. Because this economy is changing so drastically with things that whether it's the administration doing things, whether it's just outside factors outside anybody's control. I think at the end of the day, looking at a franchise investment through the lens of unit level economics for the franchisee and steady system wide franchise growth, I think is the best way to approach things. Yeah.
What about going back to franchisors and how they're driving revenue at the brand level? I think one of the big focus areas that we've seen, and we've talked to a lot of our franchise customers about this year, is not just how do we more effectively sell new franchises, but how do we actually make sure that the franchises that we've opened up are actually getting to revenue and profitability as quickly as possible. What are you hearing about that? Because it seems like there's the term has been responsible franchising. I hear it all the time, right? But I do see, we just got back from Unconference or Springboard not long ago, a lot of conversation about the importance of that. So what's your view on that? And are you really seeing a difference in how franchisors are approaching franchise development and opening new locations through making sure that they're getting the revenue and profitability as quickly as possible?
Yeah. What I would say about responsible franchising first is, we sort of initiated this conversation within the franchise community with some intentionality. Now, some I think have hijacked that term and it's become a little bit of marketing speak. But I think at the end of the day, we wanted to get the industry focused again on the things that matter most at a time where 2 years ago when we started this conversation, we were under a great deal of scrutiny by the FTC and some states. So we had some serious, regulatory issues and felt like it was important to, initiate that conversation and help franchisors and prospective franchisees, really focus on what matters most, which at the end of the day is if franchisors are making money solely through sales, that's a red flag, right? Franchisors need to be generating revenue off of royalties, right? Yes. And that's happening when franchisees are profitable within, the four corners of, their retail location or their territory, right? And so getting back to that, particularly at a time where we have this consumer pullback, I think if you can demonstrate that, and again, back to my earlier comment about franchisee validation of your brand through adding additional units themselves, or validating you to a prospect that wants to come in. I mean, that's what a lot of the conversation I think has moved towards. And I hear, every day from brands who are talking about, we're not focused right now on development. We're focused on our existing franchisees and making sure we're doing the right things to help make sure that they're performing in this environment. Because this is probably more the norm going forward than, some of the boomtown of, pre-COVID era. There's not free money out there anymore.
That's right.
We have had, recent interest rate cuts, but, they're still, not at historical highs, but, higher than they were for the last, 10, 15 years. And I think that's going to continue. I don't think the consumer is changing in the next, several years. So I think focusing on the core, so you can get back to sustainable development, I think is what we're seeing and hearing from the smart brands.
Yeah, you mentioned I agree. I totally agree. The purpose of franchising is to generate the revenue through royalties. We're super passionate about working with franchisees to do just that. Right. We have a bunch of franchise development clients that rely on Scorpion to help them kind of source leads and produce leads to buy new franchises. But our bread and butter in our business is working with small businesses and franchisees. I know you're not the marketing guy, and we've had these conversations, but I do want to get your point of view on this. One thing that's always fascinated me about franchising is that the reason that someone buys a franchise, or a core reason, is because they believe in the brand and the values of the brand and the product or the service. But they also buy it because they've got this playbook, this operating playbook. Why is there not a marketing playbook for franchisees when they buy a brand? That's what drives me nuts. You give them this operating playbook. Hey, this is the process of how you run the business. This is this is our, if you're a home service business, this is what we do when we show up to the home. We put our booties on if we're a, plumber, et cetera. But there's not hey, here's your playbook for marketing. Why do you think that is?
It's a good question. I've never thought about it before, but I think it's something that, maybe we should work on education within the industry of this is something that, frankly, it's not like franchisees in most cases are coming into your system with some background in marketing or running a small business. So a lot of times they need not just a marketing playbook, but they need a basic P&L playbook. But marketing is part of that. Right. And in a challenging economy, pulling back on marketing is the last thing that you should do. So optimizing it is probably the thing that everybody needs to focus more on. So I think it's an opportunity. Maybe it's something that the IFA and Scorpion should work on. Standardizing
we should definitely
together.
We're going to work on this. I mean, I think, again, just because you've got, again, not to wear this topic out, but I'm going to for a second. They walk in and they're given this great operating playbook that's been a lot of thought, a lot of process put into it. But then it's what are marketing? It's well, here's 17 vendors to go choose from. Good luck. And I know I'm exaggerating it a little bit.
Well, and then there's no standardization across the system.
That's right.
And that impacts the customer experience.
That's right. Yeah, well, philosophically, we're certainly on the same page about that. And that is something that we really, really want to commit to helping figure out. And again, that's not a plug on Scorpion either. It's just, look, you're doing your franchisees a service. If you can give them, hey, you should be doing X, Y, and Z at these approximate budget levels, and you should commit to this for 12 months. And, you should measure it in these ways, et cetera.
Well, I think it goes back to a lot of franchisors don't have, maybe not a lot, but a significant number of franchisors don't have full line of sight into their franchisees' P&L, right? Fair. So they don't actually know what they're spending their money on between labor and rent and marketing and, the other things that are in there. So, let's start there, right, as a best practice. Make sure that you're looking at that on a monthly, at least quarterly basis, and then sitting down and having the conversation of, hey, you're not performing at the level of, even a median within our system, and let's workshop why, and maybe marketing spend or where who you're spending with is part of the problem.
Yeah. Okay, so let's back out of marketing for a second. I know a big passion of yours has been legislation around joint employer.
Well, I wish it didn't have to be.
Yeah, I get it. But clearly, I'll keep politics aside, but clearly there are reasons that, that was brought into the limelight a couple of years ago. But you made a lot of progress on that this year. Talk a little bit about that and how much time has gone into it, and, what's your outlook on the future based on some of the kind of recent rulings.
Yeah. So let's back up 10 years.
Yep.
That's when the joint employer conversation had to start in franchising, because under the Obama administration, the Labor Department and the National Labor Relations Board changed the definition of what it means to be a joint employer. And it became a definition that was completely unwieldy and burdensome for a franchisor or franchisee relationship. So we went from I hire Jamie, I'm clearly your employer. We have a direct employment relationship. But the franchisor has no relationship.
Yeah.
The rules changed to allow the franchisor, because there's an indirect or potential control aspect to how franchisors enforce their system standards and trainings at franchisee locations, that the franchisor can now be liable. And what that meant was a lot of franchisors had to back off on providing support and training and other things that franchisees were paying for, and frankly, for the last 10 years have had to continue to pay for, because I don't know any franchisors that backed off on their royalty rates or other fees. Sure. But the franchisor, because of the liability risk, had to back off. So this hasn't been good for franchisors. There's been billions of dollars in litigation against both Zors and Zs. It hasn't been good for franchisees, and it's not good for employees, because employees, frankly, want to work for a small business, not for a faraway corporation. Yeah. So IFA's mounted a number of different efforts to change this through legislation, because we've had 4 joint employer rules in that period of time since this began in 2015. But they've all been done through regulation, and that's basically a stroke of a pen. What we need is codification through Congress passing a law. Not impossible to overturn, but extremely difficult to overturn. So that's what the American Franchise Act, which was introduced in September, is all about. And we have a significant amount of bipartisan support on this bill in the House. Government is currently shut down. We expect the Senate bill in a similar bipartisan fashion to be introduced when they return. And that's our number one priority in Congress this year, or this Congress, which we'll go through next year, is to pass the American Franchise Act. And what that's going to do is, I think, unleash the ability for franchisors to go back, frankly, to the way it was before, and provide tons of operational support and training and things that franchisees need, especially first-time franchisees, to get them started and supported on an ongoing basis.
Not to get in the weeds, but just can you give me a sense of what's the time and resource commitment that's had to go into getting this bill to where it is? Because I know we've talked about it for years, but can you just give me a sense of I've personally spent 50% of my time on this, and my team spent 50% of their time on it. Just curious, what's that like?
Yeah. So we have 70 employees at the IFA. We have 12 people that work full-time in government relations. Okay. So where I was, before. At this stage, I'm not spending a ton of day-to-day time lobbying for it. What I'm doing is a lot of this, like building awareness in the industry, fundraising for our coalition to save local business, which is something that, we've raised a significant amount of money to do advertising and public affairs work and have lobbyists that have relationships with lawmakers to help advance this bill. From a government relations team perspective, I mean, it's 100% of their time, right? It's, every day they're up meeting with lawmakers and staff who are still working even in spite of the shutdown, getting the industry mobilized behind this. So, we have 1,200 brands, we have 800,000 franchise owners, 700 suppliers. Everyone's a potential advocate in support of this. And, we say your voice has power. I mean, the most important voices, the most trusted voices in America are small businesses, not lobbyists and not big corporations. So at the end of the day, it's about connecting our relationships with policymakers in D.C., with our members in communities so that they can tell a member of Congress, hey, I'm a franchisee, or I'm a supplier, or I'm a brand headquartered in your state or district, and this is important to me, and here's the material impact it's had on our business and our relationship over the last decade. And this is a bipartisan way to put an end to this seesawing. So it's just that constant, grinding in education and advocacy at a time where there's 1,000 other trade associations and all these corporations also lobbying Congress for their attention on their parochial issue that they think is the most important thing. So, being constantly present to the point of being really annoying, but annoying enough where they say yes, and then having the resources because this is not without opposition, right? There will be opposition to this from elements of organized labor who, would much rather organize a franchise organization as one entity than individual franchise locations as they are. That's what this is all about at the end of the day. But it's not good, as I said earlier, for brands, for franchisees, or for the workforce. Yeah.
What are, if you had to, I know you're a lot of priorities, but if you had to say my top 3 or 4 priorities for 2026 for the IFA, what are those?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, it's about education about what's really good franchising. Number one priority for us is, continuing to make, we're only as good as our weakest link in franchising, and regulators and policymakers will regulate to the lowest common denominator. And I think that also means, kind of revitalizing some of the ways that we deliver education through a lot of our events, and continuing to evolve how we deliver education virtually and with other types of convenings that we do. So that's probably first and foremost. Second is, affecting policy change for the business model. That will help with creating really good, healthy franchising. And then last is just being, an unabashed evangelist for franchise stories and storytelling. And that's what our Franchise Means Local campaign is all about, getting the message out of franchisees in all sorts of industries, of all sorts of sizes and, demographics, and highlighting our brands and storytelling. So whether it's, Clement Troutman, who's a tropical smoothie franchisee who was in our first ad, or, Angie Castaneves, who is a real housewife of Salt Lake City and has a brand called Lunatic Fringe, those are the types of stories that I think we want to continue to tell. And our foundation has the resources to get that message out. So we're always looking for hand raisers and support in getting that message out.
What are some of the ways that the franchise community, suppliers, franchisees, brands can support at the local level or even at the national level?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole range of opportunities. I think, being a hand raiser and just literally reaching out to our team and saying, hey, I want to help with either advocacy or storytelling or being an educator or a speaker on a particular topic. I think those are things that we're always reaching out. We always want our members reaching out to us directly about. So there's so much that I see. Like, one of the things in franchising that I think is so unique and special that you don't get in other industries as much is the willingness to share amongst peers, even competitors. And I think that's something that, we try to embrace at IFA. So, we'll, again, meet our members where they are with what they're willing, to give, and, be a platform for education and exposure, storytelling and advocacy.
Okay. Any of those places that you feel like you have greater needs than others right now? Any of those, like those areas, like be it advocacy or storytelling or?
Look, we always need more people that are talking to lawmakers, right? So, today the number one priority I would say is, getting franchisees in the state of Maine, to engage in getting messages to senators in Maine about, standing up and supporting the American Franchise Act.
Yeah.
So that would be like a very specific thing.
Okay.
Today. A more general ask is, be involved, right?
Yeah.
Like you get out of IFA what you put into it, right? And, it does take time. It does take, some amount of resources, but, most individuals and most companies who say, we actually took the time to be intentional about our involvement in the association of whatever, your need is. Like there's going to be something there for you, whether it's, getting your team more educated about, being a good franchisor, investing in professional development through education, exposing your brand through all the different tools that we have on our website and with our expos and other events. Yep. So there's a ton there. We're available to have conversations with franchisors or suppliers or franchisees about, hey, here are business challenges. How can IFA help us solve them? So we want to, we provide that level of concierge service, as we like to call it. Yeah, and you said something I want to reinforce because we felt this. You get out of IFA what you put into it. Our putting into it at first kind of started, way back in the day, like at the convention and doing some pretty audacious things from a marketing perspective, right? Like which, we gave away cars, which I'm sure anybody watching this remembers us doing that, but big investment. But man, like we reaped so many benefits from that investment, right? And now today, we've got the preferred vendor relationship with you guys. Our team works super closely with you guys throughout the year, not just at the big conference events, but webinars, ways that we can get involved in different advocacy opportunities, educational opportunities. And I think the payback that we felt, both in terms of the business that we've been able to kind of produce through that, but also just through the relationships and feeling like we're a part of the franchise community and a part of franchise growth in the country has just been awesome. So I just want to make sure that I stamp that statement that you made. You really get out what you put into the IFA. So that was just a little plug. Well stated, Jamie. Yeah, thank you. I didn't get paid for that either, people. So just a couple other things. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about AI. How are you hearing franchisors or the community policy perhaps? Like when you think about AI, how is that going to impact franchising in the next 3 to 5 years from your point of view? Yeah, I mean, all over the map, right? In every level, like it is, even for an association, right? So, in terms of content creation, that's a huge opportunity. In terms of due diligence, I think that's, a real opportunity. I think just within your organization, it's a huge opportunity. But I think, like anything else, you've got to try some things. And figure out, what's the real business case to be made behind, investing and finding the right partners, frankly, in the technology and if, obviously in the marketing space or elsewhere, that, really understand what's your business goal and how can AI help us get there faster. Are you personally hearing or have you heard of anything, either AI leveraged in an operational function or in a marketing function that you're like, wow, that's really cool? Or, wow, that's interesting to try. Is there anything that stands out there? I don't know that it's actually been tried, and I don't even know that I recommend it. But there was a pretty interesting discussion at Springboard about AI. Dan Monahan, went through a number of different kind of use cases for how you could consider using AI at different levels in a franchise organization. So I would encourage people to check out, some of Dan's presentation for a little bit of insight there. So I want to make sure I give him Dan's always thinking about things like that. He is. Great about that. But the one that he rolled out, which I think is a little provocative, and I'm not sure that I would recommend it, but, I'll mention it here just because I think it might lead people, to think about should I really be doing that? Yeah. Right. Is, giving AI a seat at your table for, franchise advocacy councils, right? Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Bouncing a question in the room, not just off of other franchisees, but asking,
a model that you trained on your business. Yeah, that's really smart. I hadn't thought about that before. We're one of the new ways that we've been leveraging AI at Scorpion is, we've had a hard time getting franchisees to understand that just because you spend money in marketing doesn't mean that you're going to immediately produce revenue. Like there's this block in between where you should take the investment from marketing, generates a lead, and actually convince them that, you're at the right place, which oftentimes means like answering the phone. Right.
Well, if you look at some of the data from our annual franchise development report at the Leadership and Development Conference, I mean, still like 50% of franchisors are literally not returning leads that come in via phone. Yeah. And so, I mean, what are we doing here? Yeah.
We built a product. Again, we're running marketing and advertising campaigns for a lot of our clients. We built a product that we offered to our clients to just take after hours phone calls, right? So instead of sending them to a call center or to voicemail, again, a lot of our clients are home services businesses, right? So someone has a plumbing problem at 8 p.m. when your business is closed. They don't want to leave a voicemail and wait for you to call back the next day. And usually they go maybe to a call center that's not familiar with their business, with that business. They're just a general call center that's probably used by 15 different plumbing companies or 500 different plumbing companies. So we built AI to actually personalize that experience for a brand, right? So if you call Mr. Reuter of Sonoma County at 8 p.m., you're going to probably get in touch with our AI agent who has access to the booking. They can actually book the appointment for you. So we've seen that application of AI really be beneficial because it's Mr. Reuter of Sonoma County spending money in marketing and advertising, right? But that lead that may not have gone answered after hours is now actually turning into a booked appointment. So that's been one way that we've really applied AI and tried to help our customers, in a very cost-effective way.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, and getting really granular about like what's a pain point for the customer. Yeah. That is leaving revenue on the table for a franchisee and thus a franchisor, and then building a specific solution to solve that probably can be used in all sorts of different, certainly home services businesses. Yeah, yeah. So what are you most excited about in franchising next year? You can only have one thing. What are you most excited about? I'm excited about the new IFA convention. So if you haven't seen our new branding, Evolve is the theme, right? Yep. Every business, I think, is constantly evolving. We wanted to really lean in as a theme of how we're evolving the event experience for our members, hopefully new members, and new ways for both franchisors and suppliers to kind of activate and tell their story within the event. I think it's going to be really different, and I, want to underscore that. So, not going to get too into some of the details, leave a little suspense. But people are going to events for a lot more than just content, right? They really want to, have a good time. We want to create different forums for networking, but also for the education, go actually a lot deeper in the topics that matter most to people. So those are some of the high level changes that we're making, and we'll bring to light in February in Vegas. Yeah. Well, if you haven't been to IFA, you got to go to IFA because the convention is just it's a great time. It's great networking. There's great content. So if that's what you're most excited about next year, and you're doubling down on making that an even better experience, it's going to be great. So you got to go. All right, I'm going to end on a couple of personal questions, getting to know Matt Holler just outside of work. Who's your favorite musical artist? I got recency bias on this one, so I'll go with the Foo Fighters because I was just recently stumbled truly into a private show in D.C. Those of us who are friends with Matt on social media, we knew this. And those of us that are also Foo Fighters fans are insanely jealous. Yes, so they started just doing random pop-up shows around the country to roll out this new album. And they happened to be in D.C. and did a 500-person show at the Black Cat, which is a really old venue. Yep. And Dave Grohl, of course, is from the D.C. area, so it was particularly special. But I was walking my dog and saw this line in front of this club and was like, what's going on? I said to some woman, and she's like, oh, the Foo Fighters just announced at 4 o'clock they're playing tonight in a private show at the Black Cat. And so I literally ran my dog home and drove back. Got a ticket, and it was an epic night. So that's so awesome. Do you have a favorite Foo Fighters song? Ooh, good one. I would have to say The Pretender for me. Yeah, Pretender's good. That's my favorite. I go back and forth, but that's my favorite. Yeah, maybe My Hero.
Okay. That's also a great song.
Yeah.
Great song. Okay. What's one word that best describes franchising going into 2026?
Resilient.
Okay. Why that word?
I just think it's tougher out there than anybody really wants it to be right now. I think we all came into this year with a feeling of euphoria.
Yep.
And that, that hasn't manifested itself. But, you talked about the stats earlier, right?
Yep.
Franchising is still doing well. And I think we're not going to see a big shift environment-wise as we move into 2026. But I think franchising will still perform. So I would say resiliency.
Okay. What's one piece of advice you'd give to a franchisee that is considering expanding, either expanding through same-store sales growth or expanding through a multi-unit opportunity?
I think if it's an existing franchisee, I think they have a ton of leverage right now.
Okay.
Because you are who franchisors predominantly are looking for.
Yeah.
So, use that to your advantage.
Okay. All right. And what are the most successful franchise systems in 2026 look like?
I would say those that have turned the corner to development because they focused these last 2 years in this really high interest rate, inflationary environment on getting their unit level economics at their existing franchisees right.
Okay. Can we plug a brand or two that maybe you think of?
Ooh, that's dangerous.
Well?
I'm a membership organization, Jamie.
I get it. But you've got a lot of good personal relationships too in the industry. Are there certain brands that you would encourage other franchisors to go have conversations with because you've seen them do things like you just described really, really well, and you think that they could benefit other brands that want to turn that corner?
Yeah. So this is like we're on Meet the Press, and I'm the person that you're asking the question. You're not going to get a clear answer. Okay. I will give someone a clear answer if they contact me at the IFA and are involved in the association. How about
I love it. That's perfect. I can appreciate that.
Fair enough.
All right, Matt. This has been fun, man. Thank you so much.
You got it. Thanks for the time. Appreciate Scorpion's support of the IFA and being great partners.
Thank you so much, man. We appreciate it. All right, everybody. Take care.
See ya.